You could feel the air change in the room. Cameras clicking, lawmakers frozen mid-note, and one congressman staring straight across the table. Then, in a tone sharp enough to cut glass, he said the unthinkable, accusing the FBI director of covering up one of the darkest secrets in recent American history. This wasn't theater. It wasn't partisan noise. It was the sound of someone finally saying what others had been too afraid to say out loud. Jamie Raskin had come prepared, not with outrage, but with evidence, sarcasm, and a moral indictment that felt less like a hearing and more like a reckoning.
Agents, and although he was a closeted homosexual who lived in domestic partnership for decades with Clyde Tolson, he also participated in anti-gay crusades. He aggressively promoted what we would today call white Christian nationalism, and he would undoubtedly be turning over in his grave to see as one of his successors a first-generation Indian American and a proud Hindu. So I congratulate you on being a breakthrough in this sense and being a beneficiary of the civil rights movement that opened up the FBI and the federal workforce to lots of people who never would have been hired in its first decades. Alas, you share J. Edgar Hoover's dangerous obsession with blind loyalty over professionalism and effective public policy. For Hoover, it was blind loyalty to him in keeping his secrets. For you, it's blind loyalty to Donald Trump in keeping his secrets. During your confirmation, it was widely noted on all sides that your primary qualification was your unwavering loyalty to Trump. Unlike other directors, you had no work experience at the FBI, but you had made over 1,000 media and political appearances in support of Trump's campaign. Your Senate confirmation vote was 51-49, the closest in history, with your opponents warning you were not qualified and had no interest in actually developing the qualifications for the job. I hoped that they were wrong. Alas, they were not. While most other new FBI directors drew on their experience as FBI agents, you didn't have that. But you did write a picture book trilogy for children ages 5 and up based on your experience clashing with President Trump's political enemies. In your book, you describe your literary alter ego, Cash the Knight, as a wacky, easily bored wizard carrying out King Donald's vengeance by driving his enemies out of the kingdom. In the books, King Donald is besieged by the evil Hillary Queentown, but saved in the end by Cash. Then Cash goes on to catch mules who are stealing the 2020 election for the great King Donald from Sleepy Joe. And then in the third book, Cash takes down the dragon of the jalapenos, nicknamed the DOJ. Your supporters had hoped that you would graduate from imagining yourself a romantic fairy tale knight to actually running America's premier federal law enforcement agency. Alas, just as we've learned how dangerous it is to put a science-denying anti-vaxxer in charge of our public health, we've learned how dangerous it is to name as director of the FBI a man who thinks of himself as a fairy tale knight who keeps a fire-breathing dragon named DOJ at home to forcibly drive villains out of the kingdom. When Charlie Kirk was assassinated, while his killer was still on the loose, you decided you didn't need to be at FBI headquarters in Washington to work with your team while the chaotic manhunt unfolded. You spent your evening dining in a swanky Midtown Manhattan restaurant and tweeting out false information that the subject of the shooting was in custody, a statement you had to retract 1 hour later. Your performance was so disturbing that even the MAGA base was alarmed. Culture warrior Christopher Rufo, who just a few months ago sat in your chair as a Republican witness, observed that you performed terribly, and he called for your ouster. The FBI might be able to survive your delusions of grandeur and the explosively volatile temper that was on display yesterday in the Senate, but the intractable problem is that you are running the FBI not as a law enforcement agency charged with keeping the American people safe, but as a political enforcement agency working directly for the president's vengeance campaign. 7 months in, it's impossible to overstate the destruction, chaos, and demoralization you've brought to the FBI and its workforce and the resulting danger your actions have caused to our country. You've been systematically purging the FBI of its most experienced and qualified agents, division leaders, and experts in counterterror, counterintelligence, and cybersecurity, precisely the people who have the expertise you lack and which the FBI and the country need. They've been expelled from the ranks of the Bureau simply because they did their duty investigating crimes, including those committed by the mob that attacked the Capitol on January 6, 2021, and beat the hell out of more than 140 police officers, or simply because you suspected them of being insufficiently loyal to Donald Trump. You illegally sacked Brian Driscoll, the former acting director of the Bureau and a decorated counterterrorism expert who worked at the FBI for nearly 20 years. According to Driscoll, you told him your own job, quote, depended on the removal of agents who worked on the cases against the president, regardless of whether the agents chose to work on those cases or not. You added, quote, the FBI tried to put the president in jail, and he hasn't forgotten it. You forced out the leader of the Salt Lake City field office, Mehtab Saeed, just weeks before Charlie Kirk's assassination, depriving the FBI of an experienced counterterrorism expert described by her colleagues as absolutely the best and legendary. She would have led the FBI's manhunt had she not been fired. When Trump decided that rounding up immigrants with no criminal records was more important than preventing crimes like human trafficking of women and girls, drug dealing, terrorism, and fraud, you ordered the 25 largest field offices to divert thousands of agents away from chasing down violent criminals, sex traffickers, fraudsters, and scammers to carry out this immigration crackdown. Director Patel, you treated the men and women at FBI with disrespect and paranoia. You've assembled a roving band of freelancing henchmen within your office and charged them with conducting unauthorized investigations, targeting and harassing career FBI employees. Amazingly, you forced senior leadership to repeatedly take polygraph tests to prove their political loyalty and pushed out leaders who refused these demeaning exercises. And now we're seeing one very clear reason why you want to build a political FBI. The Epstein files. You want an FBI blindly loyal to Trump and to you as his enforcer so you can continue your cover-up of a massive international sex trafficking ring with more than 1,000 victims, betraying all of the survivors of the sexual violence. Before you got in this job, you called for full release of the Epstein files, telling podcaster Benny Johnson that the only reason the list was not released by DOJ and FBI was, quote, because of who's on that list. Upon your confirmation, you promised that, quote, there will be no cover-ups, no missing documents, no stone left unturned, and anyone from the prior or current Bureau who undermines this will be swiftly pursued. This spring, you ordered hundreds of agents to pore over all the Epstein files, but not to look for more clues about the money network or the network of human traffickers. You pulled these agents from their regular counterterrorism or drug trafficking duties to work around the clock, some of them sleeping at their desks, to conduct a frantic search to make sure Donald Trump's name and image were flagged and redacted wherever they appeared, whether an email, a text, a letter, an interview, a photograph, or a video. In May, Attorney General Bondi reportedly told Trump that his name had indeed appeared multiple times throughout the Epstein files. And not long thereafter, in July, you and the Attorney General released a memo claiming that, quote, no further disclosure would be appropriate or warranted. In a few short months, how did you go from being a crusader for accountability and transparency for the Epstein files to being a part of the conspiracy and cover-up? The answer is simple. You said it yourself, because of who's on that list. Donald Trump's relationship with Epstein over the years is well documented. A week ago, the Oversight Committee released Trump's disturbing birthday book, Note to Epstein, written over a drawing of a woman's naked body, referring to a, quote, wonderful secret. The Oversight Committee obtained the note from the Epstein estate, not from the FBI, raising questions again of whether the FBI has been withholding.
His voice didn't rise. It cut deeper with every word. In your book, he began, you describe yourself as a wizard on a mission to serve a king. The room half laughed, unsure whether to be amused or terrified. Then came the twist, that the same man now running the nation's most powerful law enforcement agency had once written himself into a fantasy novel as a knight doing his leader's bidding. Suddenly, no one was laughing. Raskin wasn't reading fiction. He was exposing delusion. Because what he was describing, a leader who believes he's a warrior, who purges those who question him, who bends truth to fit loyalty, sounded far too familiar. The congressman wasn't just describing a man. He was describing a system that had started to confuse loyalty with justice, and that's when he dropped the real bombshell. Beneath the sarcasm and satire, Raskin accused the FBI director of something much bigger, orchestrating a cover-up to protect powerful interests in one of the most infamous scandals of the century, the Epstein files. The accusation wasn't whispered. It was read into the congressional record, and it landed like a thunderclap. Before taking office, the director had been vocal about full transparency, promising that there would be no cover-ups, no missing pages, no secrets left unturned. But that promise didn't age well, because according to Raskin, once inside the bureau, that mission flipped. Agents were reassigned, investigations redirected, and hundreds reportedly told to comb through Epstein documents, not to find justice, but to erase traces of certain names, images, and communications that IT sounded impossible. But in politics, impossible has a strange way of becoming inevitable. Raskin claimed that instead of chasing down traffickers, agents were now chasing down redactions. Files once meant to expose a global network of exploitation were being quietly sanitized. Even the Attorney General, according to reports, acknowledged that key references had surfaced, and yet, months later, a memo appeared declaring that no further disclosures would be appropriate. That's how quickly accountability can disappear in a system built on power instead of principle. What made the moment even more jarring was how calmly Raskin delivered it. He wasn't shouting. He was dissecting. With the precision of a prosecutor, he connected the dots between a man who once claimed to fight corruption and the same man now accused of institutionalizing it. His voice never cracked, but the message did. You've built an FBI that no longer serves the people, it serves protection. To understand the weight of that, you have to look at what was happening inside the bureau itself. Experienced counterterrorism and cybercrime experts, the backbone of America's national defense, were being forced out. Veteran field officers described as legends were pushed into early retirement or reassigned to meaningless posts. Why? Because they weren't loyal enough. Loyalty, not skill, not service, not oath, had become the new standard of worth. Raskin called it what it was, a purge. The kind that doesn't happen overnight but creeps in slowly, disguised as restructuring. Agents forced to take loyalty polygraphs, others sidelined for refusing. The very people trained to protect the nation were now being tested for political obedience. It sounded like a spy novel, until you realized it was real life. And as the bureau turned inward, the outside world burned. Political violence surged. State leaders targeted in broad daylight, their families attacked in their homes. Schools turned into war zones, synagogues and churches under siege. The nation needed its law enforcement apparatus more than ever. But the FBI, the agency built to stop domestic terror and cyber threats, was distracted, its best agents reassigned to edit documents instead of saving lives. Raskin didn't have to say it outright. The message was obvious. While the Bureau was protecting someone's reputation, it failed to protect everyone else's safety. That's when he drew the line to history, to a time when the FBI had already been twisted by one man's ego. Decades ago, under its first director, the agency became a weapon against civil rights leaders, journalists, and activists. Back then, it demanded loyalty to one man. Today, Raskin warned, it was demanding loyalty to something even more dangerous, an idea of untouchable power. The irony was chilling. The same institution once feared for its overreach was now feared for its obedience. What happens when those sworn to uphold the law start serving individuals instead of ideals? When investigations become favors and justice becomes selective, democracies don't collapse with explosions. They erode in silence, through small, deliberate betrayals of principle, the kind Raskin was describing in real time. The congressman's words landed like an echo of every warning history has ever given. The FBI isn't supposed to protect power, he said. It's supposed to protect the truth. And that line, quiet, steady, unshakable, might be the most important thing said in Washington all year. Because once truth becomes negotiable, so does freedom. That Raskin's critique wasn't just about one director or one scandal. It was about a philosophy of governance, a belief that institutions can be molded to shield the powerful from consequence. He reminded everyone watching that the real danger isn't corruption itself, it's normalization. The moment when the public shrugs and says, "That's just how it works." That's when systems die, not from exposure, but from apathy. Still, there was something strangely hopeful in the fury. Raskin wasn't just tearing someone down, he was defending something sacred. The idea that justice, transparency, and accountability aren't partisan slogans. They're the oxygen of democracy. Take that away, and everything else, the hearings, the headlines, the promises, become theater. By the time he finished, the room was silent again. No one dared interrupt. The director sat motionless, jaw tight, eyes fixed. For a moment, the hearing felt less like government business and more like moral cross-examination. Raskin had done what few ever manage, made corruption feel personal. He'd shown that the cost of manipulation isn't measured in politics. It's measured in safety, in trust, in truth itself. And yet, his warning reached beyond the walls of Congress. Because this story isn't confined to DC. It's about every system where loyalty outweighs honesty. Every job where speaking truth risks losing power. Every country where institutions stop serving people and start serving personalities. Once that happens, everything begins to rot from within. The Epstein files were just the symptom. The disease was deeper, a culture of secrecy feeding on silence. Files hidden, cases closed, survivors left waiting while those in charge edited the record. And Raskin knew that by naming it, he was breaking the one rule the powerful hate most. Don't call the game what it is. But he did anyway. What makes this moment unforgettable isn't just the accusations. It's the courage of confrontation. In a political world where outrage is cheap, Raskin's anger felt earned, methodical, deliberate, and deeply moral. He wasn't performing for cameras. He was documenting, step by step, how accountability dies. First it's delayed, then it's redacted, then it's forgotten, and finally, it's erased. But that doesn't have to be the ending. Because as dark as his words were, they carried a reminder. The system only survives when people care enough to demand better. Truth doesn't protect itself. It's protected by people who refuse to let it vanish quietly. That's why this moment matters far beyond one hearing or one scandal. Because if the most powerful law enforcement agency in the world can be turned into a tool for personal loyalty, then anyone can. And if the people stop asking questions, stop watching, stop caring, the truth doesn't just get buried. It gets rewritten. Raskin's message was clear. Democracy isn't defended by slogans or speeches. It's defended by pressure, by ordinary citizens refusing to look away. The fight for transparency, for justice, for honesty, it doesn't end when the cameras turn off. It starts there. So when he ended with the words, "You've left us less safe than before," he wasn't talking about physical safety alone. He was talking about the safety of truth itself. Because when truth is edited, so is justice. And when justice is compromised, no one is safe. Not the powerful, not the powerless, not the people watching at home. The story isn't over. What happens next, whether the Bureau reforms, whether the files are released, whether the truth comes out, depends on whether people keep paying attention. Because silence is the last refuge of corruption. So if you're still watching this, and you believe accountability still matters, that truth still matters, that no person or position should ever stand above the law, don't just scroll past. Stay part of this conversation. Because the only way the truth survives is if we refuse to let it disappear. Make sure you're subscribed. Hit like if you believe in transparency. Share this so others know what's being said behind closed doors. Because what happens next will define more than politics. It will define the kind of country we're willing to be.